Welcome children. This is the Computer Science ICT class, session 1. Today we are going to see the chapter Computer Languages. We are going to start with first generation computer languages. Okay, the first generation computers are as huge as your classroom or as huge as your room of the house. Can you see the entire box there with so many switch panels inside them? These were the computers that were launched first. Okay, these machines are nowhere related right now to the tabs or the laptops that we use. Then why should we study about the first generation of computers? That's because the first generation computer language is still the one that is understood by the computers. The computer, does it understand English? No. Does it understand Hindi? Not at all. So how does a computer understand what a user wants or what human beings need? That's why we read about the first generation language. Alright, so what is the link between a first generation language and a first generation computers? The first generation language was exclusively mapped for the first generation computers. Okay, so what are these switches? All we know is a keyboard or a touchpad. What are these switch panels? First generation computers had only switches. Every panel would have switches. What does a human or a person sitting in front of the computer do? They will switch on and off for signals. For example, if I want to switch on a bulb, what will I do? I just go and switch that on, right? Yes, when I switch it on, it's considered as a signal and the bulb glows. Same way, I would instruct my computer by switching off one switch, switching off on another switch. For example, you start with take this, okay, a switch of control panel switches here. Alright, now I want to tell the computer to switch off. What will I do? I'll just switch off that. Why would a computer like this would need first generation language? We would need that language to make the computer understand what we wanted to do. Yes, can you see a lady sitting there and toggling switches? What is called as toggling? Switching on and off a switch is called as toggling. If it is on, you switch it off, it is called as a toggle switch. Alright? So do you see a lady sitting in front and doing that? And here also a man is sitting and toggling switches. That's how we were able to communicate to the computer to do our work done. Okay, so how did they all work? What were they all made of? The first generation computers had something called as vacuum tubes. Okay, the computers in first generation usually use a film called as vacuum tubes. What are these vacuum tubes? They are something similar to what you find in your light bulbs. These are tiny films which will help in communicating what the signals given by the human to the computer inside. Okay, so they were completely manufactured and made work by these vacuum tubes. Okay, when were they launched? They were launched by 1951 and they started using these kind of computers from 1951. Alright, and what are these two things? The magnetic tapes and magnetic drums. Yes, computers are exclusively used for storing purposes, correct? Yes. When we talk about storage, we would need something or a device to be inside the computer to help us in storing things. Yes or no? Yes, similar to your hard disk, pen drive, those are all external storage devices. You have something called internal memories right now in your laptops. They say it is 1 terabyte internal memory. They give you 64 GB internal memory, wherein you store things inside computers. Similarly, first generation computers had magnetic tapes and magnetic drums. When magnetic tapes and magnetic drums were used, it was a very tiny memory space. It was just kilobytes, okay, just kilobytes, not even megabytes, the ones that we are talking about today. Alright, so the space was very, very tiny, and the disadvantage of that was when you started using them, if the memory space exceeded, when you started losing out the memory space, what happens was the older memory, the older data started getting deleted. Alright, so the disadvantage of a magnetic tape was that, and magnetic drums were also used for storage, and it had a very small storage space. Okay, now we are going to come to first generation language. So that's the chapter all about when you're going to start with learning about languages. The first generation language, as I already told you, is something linked only to the first generation computers. Alright, they are called as machine level programming language. Why did you call it as a machine level? A machine is a simple device that understands instructions from us. All we do is just switch on and switch off to make it understand. Yes, similarly, computer is also a machine which will understand just a simple switch on and off. That's all. That's the reason they are called as machine level programming language. Okay, so what else do we know about the language? They are grouping of programming languages. That means every machine level instruction, that is zeros, ones, you switch on, switch off, all these are instructions. So when you group all of them, they become a first generation programming language, or you call them as machine level language. Okay? Alright. So the first generation language will be consisting of these things. Okay? What are binary numbers? For example, bi means 2. So there are going to be just 2 instructions in a machine language. Those are zeros and ones. Okay, take an example of the same light bulb. When I switch it off, it understands it has to switch off. So that signal is considered as 0. When I want it on, I switch it on. So that time the bulb considered it as signal 1. So these are the numbers we are talking about as the input instructions in programming language. So all the computers can understand is zeros and ones. So the first generation computers, the switches inside the first generation computers could understand only these 2 signals. Okay, that is called as the lowest level of language. Okay, why do we call it as the lowest level of language? We are humans and we could not understand the zeros and ones. Imagine you're going to have a set of panel. For example, I'm going to switch off this, switch on, switch on, switch on, switch off, again switch off, switch on, switch off, and switch on. So these are the set of instructions. Will I be able to understand them when somebody else reads it? No. When I show this to other person, will they be able to understand this? Not at all. So this would need a complete translation for us, but this is the easiest language for machines. So they are called as the lowest level of language. Okay? And toggling switches. What did we see earlier? The switch can be switched off or on. So these switch and off and on things are called as toggling. So when you do that on switches, they are called as toggling switches. Alright? And what are the inputs? What is input? You give something to the computer. A user, a human gives something to the computer is called as an input. So these inputs for a first generation language is usually binary instructions, zeros and ones. These are called as the binary numbers or binary instructions to the first generation language. Alright? Yes, so what did we learn today? We learned about the computer languages, the first generation computer language, and also about how did they work with the first generation computers. And the next session we are going to see about the second generation computer languages and the computers.